Montana Territory, 1887. The unforgiving wind howled across the open prairie like a wounded animal, driving icy needles of sleet against the weathered walls of the Circle O Ranch. Inside the main house, Jack O'Malley stared out the frost-rimmed window at his struggling cattle operation, a dream he'd carved from wilderness with nothing but grit and the calloused hands of a 25-year-old who'd seen too much. Not much of a legacy, he muttered to himself, running fingers through his sun-streaked brown hair. The past 3 winters had been brutal, taking not just livestock but good men. Jack had buried 2 ranch hands last season alone. The frontier took more than it gave, and he'd learned early that attachment only made the inevitable losses harder to bear. His ranch foreman, Hank Morley, cleared his throat from the doorway. "Mail's in." "Got something might interest you." He tossed a worn newspaper onto the rough-hewn table. Page 4. Jack glanced down at the folded Sacramento Bee, dated 3 weeks prior. His eye caught a column of advertisements. Matrimonial opportunities for GNTLMEN of means. Hank tapped a tobacco-stained finger on one particular notice. "Might be time you considered it, boss. Ranch this size needs a woman's touch, needs children running around someday. A man alone is just alone." Jack scoffed. "The frontier's no place for a city woman. They come out here with their fancy dresses and tender hearts, then wither like spring flowers in August heat." "I've seen it." The memory of his mother's slow decline after his father dragged her to Montana surfaced unbidden. She died when Jack was 12, her spirit broken long before her body followed. "Suit yourself," Hank shrugged. "But a man building something this big ought to have someone to build it for." He departed, leaving Jack alone with the newspaper. Against his better judgment, Jack found himself reading the matrimonial advertisements. Most were from women seeking security, widows with children, shopgirls tired of city life. Nothing that sparked interest. Then his eyes landed on a simple notice: "Young woman of good character and education seeks correspondence with honest gentlemen. Unafraid of hard work and solitude, desires partnership not charity, references available. Miss L.T. General Delivery, Boston, Massachusetts." Something in the straightforward words stirred him. No flowery promises or desperate pleas, just practical honesty. Before he could reconsider, Jack pulled a sheet of paper from his desk drawer and began to write. 3 months of correspondence later, the stagecoach rattled into Timber Creek with dust billowing behind it like a prairie fire. Jack stood awkwardly by the general store, hat in hand, stomach knotted with regret. What madness had possessed him to invite a stranger into his life? He'd been clear in his letters about the harsh realities, the isolation, the endless work, the primitive conditions, yet she'd still agreed to come. The coach door swung open, and Jack braced himself for disappointment. Instead, what emerged was the woman who would utterly transform his understanding of frontier strength. Lillian Taylor stood 5'4" in sensible brown boots, her traveling dress a practical blue cotton that had seen better days. At 22, her face carried both youth and determination in equal measure. Honey blonde hair was secured practically beneath a simple hat, though errant tendrils had escaped during the journey. Her complexion, naturally fair, had already begun acquiring the sun-kissed look of travelers heading west. What struck Jack most weren't her obvious attributes, though her clear green eyes and gentle curves would have captured any man's attention. It was the way she surveyed her surroundings with keen assessment rather than dismay. "Mr. O'Malley?" she asked, extending a gloved hand with the confidence of a business partner rather than a prospective bride. "Miss Taylor," he nodded, taking her hand briefly. "Welcome to Timber Creek." "Thank you for meeting me." Her voice carried the refined cadence of Boston, but none of the affected softness he'd expected. "I hope the journey hasn't delayed your work too severely." "Nothing that can't wait," Jack gestured to her single trunk. "Is this all your baggage?" "Yes," a small smile touched her lips. "Your letters were quite explicit about practicalities. I saw no sense in bringing what wouldn't serve." Jack felt an unexpected flicker of approval. "The buggy's this way, town's not much, as you can see." "It has the essentials," she observed, glancing at the general store, the small church, and the saloon that comprised most of Timber Creek's commercial district. "The rest is what people make of it." As they drove the 12 miles to the Circle O, Lillian asked intelligent questions about cattle management, water resources, and winter preparations. Jack found himself answering more fully than he'd intended, surprised by her genuine interest. "Your letters mentioned wanting a wife to help with the operation," she said finally, as the ranch buildings came into view. "I should be clear, Mr. O'Malley, I didn't come to be merely decorative. I intend to earn my place. Jack studied her profile against the setting sun. This isn't Boston, Miss Taylor. Life here breaks most people. I'm aware something haunted flickered behind her eyes. Boston broke people too, just differently. I prefer to choose my challenges rather than have them thrust upon me. The main house loomed before them, a solidly built two-story structure of squared logs and proper windows that stood as testament to Jack's determination. Unlike most frontier cabins, it had been built with permanence in mind. It's not what you're accustomed to, Jack said, suddenly self-conscious of the primitive conditions. Lillian's gaze traveled over the house, the barn, the corrals, and the bunkhouse. It's more than most have. You've built something substantial here. She turned those perceptive green eyes on him. The question remains whether you truly want someone to share it with, or if you simply need a housekeeper who won't require additional quarters. The directness caught him off guard. I don't know, he admitted, surprising himself with his honesty. I know a ranch this size needs a woman's influence to become a proper home. I know I'm tired of returning to empty rooms after long days. Beyond that, he shrugged. Then we have a starting point, Lillian said simply. I suggest a 3-month arrangement. I'll fulfill the duties of a rancher's wife, cooking, cleaning, gardening, whatever tasks need doing. You'll provide safety and fair treatment. At the end of 3 months, if either of us finds the arrangement unsatisfactory, you'll pay my fare back to Boston. If we suit, we'll marry properly. Jack stared at her, no tears, no romantic notions, just practical terms. That's reasonable. I find reason serves better than sentiment on most occasions, she replied, though something wistful colored her tone. That evening, Jack watched Lillian move efficiently around the kitchen that had seen little use since Mrs. Peters, their previous cook, had returned east the year before. The ranch hands typically ate simple fare prepared by whoever drew the short straw, but tonight, delicious aromas filled the house. Where did you learn to cook? Jack asked, setting the table as she'd requested. Necessity, Lillian answered, sliding a pan of golden cornbread from the oven. My father died when I was 16, my mother followed a year later. I managed our boarding house until my brother sold it from under me. Jack frowned. You mentioned only distant relations in your letters. Charles is distant in all ways that matter. Her tone closed the subject as she laid out a hearty stew, cornbread, and preserved peaches. Will your foreman be joining us? Hank takes meals with the men unless invited, I thought. This first night should be just us. Something softened in Lillian's expression, a wise choice. First impressions matter, and I'd rather know who I'm potentially tying myself to before meeting everyone else. They ate in surprisingly comfortable silence until Jack found himself saying, This is the best meal I've had since coming to Montana. Thank you. Though I suspect the competition hasn't been particularly fierce. Her smile transformed her face, bringing warmth to her practical demeanor. Jack found himself smiling back, true enough. But still. Later, showing her to the small bedroom off the kitchen that had been hastily prepared, Jack awkwardly explained, When we marry, if we marry, I'll have the master bedroom upstairs ready. For now, I thought this more proper. Lillian nodded, It's entirely suitable. Good night, Mr. O'Malley. Jack, he corrected impulsively. If you're to be the mistress of this house, even temporarily, you should use my given name. Then you must call me Lillian, she hesitated. I appreciate your consideration for propriety, Jack. Many men wouldn't have bothered. He tipped his head in acknowledgement. Sleep well, Lillian. As Jack climbed the stairs to his lonely room, he realized something had shifted. For the first time in years, the house felt like more than shelter. It felt like it held possibility. The next weeks brought remarkable changes to the circle. Lillian proved herself both capable and determined, rising before dawn to prepare breakfast for the hands, then tackling the neglected house with systematic efficiency. By the second week, curtains appeared at windows, the pantry was organized, and a small kitchen garden had been started behind the house. More surprising was her insistence on learning ranch operations. Jack found her one morning in the barn with Diego, his Mexican horse wrangler, receiving instruction on treating minor equine injuries. You don't need to do this, Jack said, leaning against the stall door. Lillian looked up from where she was applying liniment to a sorrel gelding's fetlock. If I'm to be a rancher's wife, I should understand the business. What if you're injured or away? Someone should know these things. Diego grinned. She has steady hands, patron, better than some cowboys. Jack couldn't argue. Instead, he found himself including Lillian in more aspects of ranch life. She rode out with him to check fence lines, asked intelligent questions about cattle breeding, and even assisted during a difficult calving when extra hands were needed. One evening, as spring thunderheads gathered on the horizon, they sat on the porch watching lightning illuminate the distant mountains. "Why did you answer my advertisement?" Jack asked suddenly. "A woman with your abilities could have found security in Boston." Lillian was quiet so long he thought she might not answer. "Security isn't the same as purpose," she finally said. "After my parents died, I managed our boarding house for 5 years. When Charles sold it, he offered to find me a suitable husband, a business associate twice my age who needed someone to manage his household and provide heirs." She looked out at the gathering storm. "I realized I'd never made a single choice about my own life. Everyone else decided what I should want, need, become." Lightning flashed, illuminating the steel in her eyes. "Coming west was my choice. Building something lasting would be my achievement, not merely my duty." Jack studied her profile, seeing for the first time the vulnerability beneath her practical exterior. "And if I'm just another man deciding your fate?" "You're not," she said simply. "You offered terms," I countered. "We agreed as equals." She turned to him. "The question is whether you truly want a partner or merely someone to ease your loneliness without disturbing your solitude." The insight struck uncomfortably close to Jack's core belief. He'd built walls around himself after watching his mother's spirit crumble under frontier hardships, convinced that emotional distance was the only protection against inevitable loss. "I don't know if I know how to be a proper husband," he admitted. "The men I respected growing up were hard men who survived by keeping their hearts guarded." And were they happy, these survivors? Jack thought of his father, who'd lived another 15 lonely years after his mother's death, becoming more bitter with each passing winter. "No, but they endured." "Is that all you want from life, to endure?" Lillian's question hung between them as the first heavy raindrops began to fall. Before Jack could answer, hoofbeats pounded into the yard. Diego rode up, rain plastering his shirt to his body. "Patron, the North Creek is flooding. The yearlings in the upper pasture are cut off." Jack was on his feet instantly. "Saddle my horse. Wake the hands." "I'll come too," Lillian said, rising. "No," Jack's tone was sharper than intended. "Stay here where it's safe." Something like disappointment crossed her face, but she nodded. "I'll have dry clothes and hot food ready when you return." Hours later, soaked to the bone and exhausted, Jack led his men back to the ranch. They'd managed to move the yearlings to higher ground, but not before two were swept away by the raging creek. The loss stung but could have been far worse without their quick action. True to her word, Lillian had kept the stove hot and food ready. She organized the wet, tired men, ensuring each had dry clothes and hot coffee before serving bowls of hearty stew. She worked alongside Hank's wife, who'd come from the foreman's cabin to help, moving with quiet efficiency. Jack watched her care for his men with the same practical compassion she'd shown in every task. When she finally approached him with dry clothes and a steaming mug, he accepted both gratefully. "You should change before you catch your death," she said softly. "I've drawn hot water in the kitchen for washing." Later, as the ranch settled into exhausted quiet, Jack found Lillian still awake, mending a shirt by lamplight in the kitchen. "You should rest," he said, lowering himself into a chair across from her. "It's been a long night." "I wanted to be sure everyone was settled." Her fingers moved steadily with the needle. "Did you lose many cattle?" "2 yearlings." Could have been the whole herd without Diego's warning. Jack watched her hands, strong and capable, as they repaired what was broken. "You've been good for this place." She glanced up, surprise evident in her face. "Thank you." "I've been thinking about what you asked earlier, about enduring versus living." He struggled to find words for thoughts he'd never fully examined. "When my mother died, something in my father died too. He taught me that caring too deeply was dangerous out here." Lillian set down her mending. "And yet you've built something that requires deep care. This ranch, these people, they matter to you." "They depend on me." "That's not the same thing." Her green eyes held his. "Dependence can exist without caring. You could be a fair employer, a competent rancher, without investing your heart. But you don't just give these men wages, you give them respect, belonging, purpose." Jack had never considered his actions in such terms. "It's just good business to treat people right." "Is that why you rode out in a dangerous storm tonight, business?" The question lingered between them, unanswerable. 3 days later, the danger shifted from water to fire. Lightning had sparked a blaze in the dry grass beyond the east pasture, and with the spring winds it moved quickly toward the ranch. "Get the wagon loaded with valuables," Jack ordered as men scrambled to prepare. "We may need to evacuate if it jumps the creek." Lillian organized the house with remarkable calm, packing essential documents, family heirlooms, and practical supplies. When Jack returned from directing the men in creating fire breaks, he found her in his office, carefully wrapping the framed photograph of his parents in his mother's quilt. "How did you know to save that?" he asked. "It's the only personal item you display," she answered simply. "Everything else in this house serves a function, this serves a memory." Something shifted in Jack's chest, recognition that this woman saw him more clearly in weeks than people who'd known him for years. "The fire's moving fast," he said. "If it crosses the East Ridge, I want you to take the wagon and head to town." Lillian straightened. "And you?" "I'll stay with the men to protect what we can." "Then I'll stay as well," her tone brooked no argument. "I can help with the bucket line or tend injuries if needed." "Lillian." "I didn't come west to run from difficulty," she interrupted. "If this is to be my home, I won't abandon it at the first sign of danger." The simple declaration, "if this is to be my home," struck Jack like a physical blow. In the weeks since her arrival, he'd carefully avoided considering the permanent implications of their arrangement, focusing instead on practical day-to-day matters. Now, faced with potential destruction, the thought of Lillian claiming the Circle O as home filled him with unexpected determination. "Very well," he conceded, "but you stay with Hank's wife at the main house. If I give the order to evacuate, you go, no arguments." The fire raged through the night, stopped only by the combined efforts of the ranch hands, neighboring settlers, and a providential shift in the wind. By dawn, exhaustion had claimed most of the men, who collapsed wherever they could find space. Jack found Lillian in the kitchen, tending to Diego's burned hands with gentle efficiency. "It will blister," she told the wrangler, applying salve. "Keep it clean and come see me tomorrow for fresh bandages." "Gracias, señora," Diego murmured, clearly impressed by her care. When they were alone, Lillian turned her attention to Jack. "You should rest. You've been up for nearly 2 days." "So have you," he noted the smudges of ash on her face, the weariness in her stance. "I slept a few hours." "More than you, I suspect." She dampened a cloth and gently wiped a streak of soot from his cheek. The unexpected tenderness of the gesture froze him in place. Their eyes met, and for a moment something electric passed between them. Then Lillian stepped back, suddenly self-conscious. "Forgive me, that was presumptuous." "No," Jack said, catching her hand before she could retreat further. "It was nice." A faint blush colored her cheeks. "Still, you should rest. The danger is past and everything else can wait." As spring melted into summer, the rhythm of ranch life established a comfortable pattern. Lillian proved herself invaluable not just in domestic matters, but in the business of the ranch itself. Her neat handwriting and skill with figures brought order to Jack's haphazard bookkeeping. Her garden flourished, providing fresh vegetables that improved everyone's health and spirits. More surprising was the change in the ranch's social standing. Under Lillian's influence, the Circle O began hosting Sunday dinners for neighboring ranchers and townspeople. The isolation that had characterized Jack's existence for years gradually gave way to community connections that proved beneficial in unexpected ways. "Thompson's offering us first claim on his yearling bulls," Jack told her one evening as they sat on the porch, watching fireflies rise from the tall grass. "Says his wife insisted after enjoying your apple pie last Sunday." Lillian smiled. "Mrs. Thompson mentioned her husband was looking to reduce his herd before winter. I simply suggested our interests might align." Jack shook his head in amazement. "You've done more for this ranch's prospects in 2 months than I managed in 2 years of trying." "People respond to belonging," Lillian said simply. "You built this place with hard work, but it becomes truly valuable when it connects to others." As their 3-month agreement neared its conclusion, Jack found himself increasingly preoccupied with Lillian's impending decision. She had fulfilled every expectation and exceeded most. The ranch was thriving under their joint management, yet he'd never directly spoken of his growing feelings, maintaining the respectful distance their arrangement dictated. The catalyst came unexpectedly. Jack returned from a 3-day cattle drive to find Lillian in the garden with Catherine Reynolds, the young wife of a neighboring rancher. Their heads were bent together over the tomato plants, their conversation serious. "He doesn't mean the cruel things he says," Catherine was saying, her voice tight with suppressed emotion. It's just the pressure of the mortgage and the baby coming. Intent doesn't lessen impact, Lillian replied gently. Has he struck you? Catherine's silence was answer enough. You can stay here tonight, Lillian continued. I'll speak with Jack when he returns. David would never allow it, Catherine whispered. He says a wife's place is with her husband no matter what. A husband worthy of the name protects his wife, not terrorizes her. Lillian's voice carried the quiet authority Jack had come to respect. The spare room is ready whenever you need it. Jack cleared his throat to announce his presence and both women straightened. Catherine hurriedly made excuses and departed, leaving Lillian looking troubled in the evening light. How much did you hear? She asked directly. Enough, Jack moved closer, noting the new rows of beans she'd planted in his absence. Would you really have offered her sanctuary without consulting me? Yes, Lillian met his gaze steadily. Would you have denied it? No, Jack surprised himself with the immediacy of his answer. Reynolds needs a reminder about proper treatment of a wife. If housing Catherine delivers that message, so be it. Relief softened Lillian's expression. I wasn't certain you'd agree. Why have I given you cause to think I'd approve of a man mistreating his wife? The question held genuine concern. No, you've been nothing but respectful. Lillian brushed garden soil from her hands. But many men consider such matters private, between husband and wife alone. Some matters deserve privacy, Jack acknowledged. Cruelty isn't among them. They walked together toward the house, comfortable silence between them until Lillian spoke again. Our 3 months end next week. The simple statement sent Jack's heart racing. Yes. Have you given thought to what you want? Jack stopped walking, turning to face her directly. The setting sun gilded her honey-blonde hair, and her practical work dress couldn't disguise the gentle curves he'd grown increasingly aware of. I want you to stay, he said simply. As my wife. Something vulnerable flickered across Lillian's face, because I'm useful to the ranch. Because I can't imagine this place or my life without you in it. The admission cost him more than he'd expected, breaking through years of emotional guardedness. Lillian studied his face, searching for something. When I came here, I wanted purpose and partnership. I've found both, but I've also discovered I want something more. Jack's throat tightened. What's that? I want a marriage that includes affection, not merely respect, tenderness, not just practical consideration. Her cheeks colored slightly. I want a husband who desires me as a woman, not just values me as a helpmate. The directness of her words struck Jack like a physical blow. In his determination to be respectful, had he made her doubt his attraction. Lillian, he said, his voice rougher than intended, I've wanted you since the moment you stepped down from that stagecoach, but I wanted to honor our agreement, to give you the freedom to leave if ranch life proved too difficult. And if I don't want to leave, her green eyes held a challenge that made his pulse quicken. Then I'd ask you properly. Jack took her hand in his. Lillian Taylor, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife, not for convenience or practicality, but because I believe we could build something far greater together than either of us could alone? Her smile bloomed slowly, transforming her face. Yes, Jack O'Malley, I will marry you. Before Jack could respond, hoofbeats thundered into the yard. Hank dismounted in a flurry of dust, his expression grave. Rider coming. Says he's Lillian's brother from Boston. The blood drained from Lillian's face. Charles here. Jack felt her hand tremble in his. Is he alone? Appears so, riding a hired horse from town. Should be here within the hour. See that the men keep working normally, Jack instructed, and have Mrs. Morley prepare an extra plate for supper. When Hank departed, Jack turned to find Lillian pale with shock. Why would Charles come all this way? I don't know, she whispered, but it can't be good. Charles Taylor arrived as the sun disappeared behind the mountains, a city man ill-suited to frontier travel. Despite the dust of the trail, his clothes were expensively tailored, his manner that of a man accustomed to deference. Lillian, he greeted coolly, dismounting with obvious discomfort. You look rustic. Charles, her voice betrayed nothing of the anxiety Jack had witnessed earlier. This is unexpected. Indeed. When your letters stopped arriving at our agreed-upon address, I was forced to make inquiries. He glanced dismissively at the ranch buildings. I see you've found accommodation. This is Jack O'Malley, Lillian introduced. Owner of the Circle O Ranch, Jack, my brother Charles Taylor. Jack extended his hand, taking the measure of the man whose actions had sent Lillian west. Charles's handshake was firm but brief, his assessment of Jack equally cursory. "Mr. O'Malley, I trust you've treated my sister with appropriate consideration." "Miss Taylor has been treated with the respect she deserves," Jack replied evenly. "She's become invaluable to this ranch and this community." Charles's tight smile didn't reach his eyes. How charming, Lillian always did have a talent for making herself useful. However, her little frontier adventure has gone on long enough. I've come to bring her home. Jack felt Lillian stiffen beside him. "I am home," she said quietly. "Don't be ridiculous," Charles waved a dismissive hand. "This was merely an impulsive reaction to disappointment. The arrangement I proposed with Mr. Blackburn still stands. He's willing to overlook your indiscretion." In fleeing Boston, Jack's protective instincts flared. Miss Taylor isn't going anywhere she doesn't wish to go, and she certainly doesn't need a man's overlooking anything about her character or choices. Charles's expression hardened. "This doesn't concern you, rancher. Family matters should remain private." "Jack is my family now," Lillian interjected, her voice steady despite the tension vibrating through her. "We're to be married. I sent you a letter explaining my decision weeks ago." "Which I never received," Charles countered. "Convenient." "Nevertheless, you remain my responsibility until properly married. As your only male relation, I cannot permit such an unsuitable match." "Permit?" Jack stepped forward, his patience evaporating. "Your sister is a grown woman who has demonstrated more intelligence and character than most men I've known. She doesn't require your permission for anything." Charles's smile turned calculating. "Perhaps not. But she might require your awareness of certain facts before you commit to this arrangement." "Charles, don't," Lillian warned, genuine fear entering her voice for the first time. "Mr. O'Malley deserves to know exactly what sort of woman he's welcoming into his home," Charles continued smoothly. "My sister failed to mention she was engaged once before. To a respected Boston physician who discovered, rather unfortunately, that she was unable to bear children. A rather significant omission for a man seeking to build a dynasty in this wilderness." The cruel revelation hung in the air like gunsmoke. Jack saw Lillian flinch as if physically struck, her complexion ashen in the gathering dusk. "I think," Jack said with dangerous calm, "we should continue this discussion inside. Miss Taylor, would you ask Mrs. Morley to serve supper? I'd like a private word with your brother." Lillian hesitated, clearly torn between fleeing the humiliation and standing her ground. "Please," Jack added softly, "I'll join you shortly." Once Lillian had gone, Jack turned to Charles with cold fury. "You came 1,000 miles to publicly humiliate your sister. That suggests either remarkable dedication or remarkable cruelty." Charles straightened his jacket, unimpressed. "I came to prevent her from making another disastrous decision based on romantic notions. Lillian has always been impractical despite her sensible appearance. Our parents indulged her excessively." "And what's your interest in her future? Genuine concern or something else?" "Mr. Blackburn's business connections would be exceedingly valuable to my import company," Charles admitted without shame. "Their arrangement would benefit all parties." Except Lillian, Jack's disgust was palpable. "You're selling your sister to advance your business interests. I'm securing her future with a man who accepts her limitations. Can you say the same, rancher? A man building an empire needs heirs." The question struck at Jack's deepest fears, the legacy he'd been working to build, the future generations he'd imagined inheriting the Circle O. For a moment, doubt clouded his resolve. "I'll ask you one question," Jack said finally. "Does Lillian know the terms of this arrangement, that her marriage was meant to secure your business dealings?" Charles's silence was answer enough. "Get back on that horse," Jack said quietly. "Ride to town, take the next stage east. If you're still here tomorrow, you'll learn exactly how we deal with cattle thieves in Montana territory." "You can't threaten me." "That wasn't a threat. It was frontier justice." Jack stepped closer, every inch the hardened rancher who'd survived a decade of Montana's harshest challenges. Stealing a man's future for personal gain is no different than stealing his livelihood. Both earn the same consequence out here. Charles assessed the steel in Jack's eyes and evidently found it convincing. "Lillian will regret this decision when winter comes, and she's trapped in this wilderness with a man who resents her barrenness." "The only thing I resent," Jack replied, "is not meeting Lillian sooner." Inside, Jack found Lillian in the kitchen, her back straight as a fence post as she mechanically arranged plates on a tray. Her eyes were dry but red-rimmed when she turned to him. "Charles is returning to town tonight," Jack said simply. Relief and disbelief warred on her face. He agreed to leave. He recognized the wisdom of an early departure. Jack moved closer but didn't touch her, sensing her fragility. "Lillian, why didn't you tell me?" She set down the plates with deliberate care. "Would it have mattered if you'd known from the beginning that I couldn't give you children?" The question deserved honest consideration. Jack thought of the legacy he'd been building, the dreams of sons and daughters to inherit his life's work. Then he thought of the empty house before Lillian's arrival, the cold meals eaten in silence, the crushing solitude of success without connection. "It would have mattered," he acknowledged finally, "but it wouldn't have changed my decision to write to you, and it certainly doesn't change my wish to marry you now." Tears welled in her eyes. "You don't need to say that out of pity or obligation. I've never said anything to you from either." Jack closed the distance between them, taking her hands in his. "The Circle O was just land and buildings before you came. You've made it a home not just for me but for everyone here. That's a legacy worth building, with or without children." A tear slipped down Lillian's cheek. "I should have told you. I was afraid." "We're all afraid of something," Jack interrupted gently. "I've spent years afraid of caring too deeply, convinced the frontier would take whatever I loved. But you've shown me that building walls doesn't prevent loss, it only guarantees loneliness." Lillian's hands tightened on his. "What happens now?" "Now I ask you again with full knowledge and open eyes." Jack's voice softened. "Lillian Taylor, will you marry me? Not for what you can give me or what I can provide you, but because together we've already built something neither of us could create alone." Her smile bloomed through tears. "Yes, Jack O'Malley. 1,000 times yes." They were married 2 weeks later in the small church in Timber Creek, the entire community turning out to celebrate. Lillian wore a simple cream dress ordered from the Sears catalog months earlier in a moment of private hope. Jack, clean-shaven and uncomfortable in his best suit, couldn't take his eyes off his bride. The reception at the Circle O brought together ranchers, townspeople, and hands in a celebration that lasted well into the night. Jack watched Lillian move among their guests with natural grace, belonging in this place as if she'd been born to it. "You got lucky, boss," Hank observed, passing Jack a glass of whiskey as they watched Lillian laughing with Diego's wife. "When you sent for a bride, you got yourself a partner instead." "Luckier than I deserve," Jack agreed. Later that night, alone in the master bedroom that Lillian had transformed with simple touches, crisp curtains, a colorful quilt, a vase of wildflowers, Jack finally allowed himself to fully embrace the feelings he'd held in check for months. Lillian came to him with a mixture of nervousness and determination that characterized everything she did. Their first kiss as husband and wife was tentative, then deepened with growing confidence. "I never thought I'd find this," she whispered against his lips. "A place to belong, someone to belong to." "We belong to each other now," Jack answered, his hands gentle on her waist. "Everything I have, everything I am, it's yours." "And I am yours," she promised. "Whatever comes, whatever challenges we face them together." As moonlight spilled through the window, casting silver patterns across their bed, Jack O'Malley realized how profoundly his world had changed. The man who had believed that the frontier was no place for love had found not just companionship but deep, abiding partnership with a woman whose strength matched his own. What had begun as a practical arrangement, a cowboy's pragmatic search for a wife, had transformed into something far more valuable. A love strong enough to withstand the harshest Montana winter, the hottest summer drought, and all the unpredictable seasons of life on the frontier. 5 years later, Jack stood on the porch of the expanded Circle O main house, watching Lillian lead their newly adopted 4-year-old daughter around the garden. Little Emma's delighted laughter as she discovered a ripe strawberry hidden beneath green leaves was sweeter than any sound Jack had ever heard. The ranch had prospered beyond his wildest expectations. The original buildings were now supplemented by a proper bunkhouse for the increased number of hands, a schoolhouse that served neighboring families as well as ranch children, and expanded operations that included not just cattle but horses bred from Diego's expert stock selection. More important than the material success was the community they'd built. The Circle O had become a gathering place, a sanctuary for those in need, and a model of what determination and heart could achieve on the frontier. When Lillian had suggested they might offer a home to Emma, Orphaned when her parents' wagon overturned crossing the river, Jack hadn't hesitated. The love he felt for this small girl had nothing to do with blood and everything to do with the family he and Lillian had created together. Lillian looked up, catching his gaze across the yard. Her smile, still capable of quickening his pulse after 5 years of marriage, held all the warmth and certainty he'd ever needed. She'd come west seeking purpose and partnership. He'd sought a practical solution to his solitude. What they'd found instead was the truest definition of home, not a place built of timber and nails, but a bond forged through shared dreams, mutual respect, and love strong enough to transform a harsh frontier into the foundation for a future neither could have imagined alone. As Emma ran toward him with her precious strawberry, Jack lifted her high in the air, her delighted giggles warming the spring afternoon. Lillian joined them, slipping her hand into his with the easy familiarity of absolute belonging. "Happy?" she asked softly. Jack looked at his wife, their daughter, and the thriving ranch stretching toward the distant mountains. "Beyond anything I ever thought possible," he answered truthfully. The cowboy who had needed a wife had found something far greater, the woman of his dreams, and with her, a life richer than any frontier fortune.